putting that onto our YouTube site. I think from tomorrow we'll be able to get it up there. Okay, so let's have a look at the sports nutrition side, and we get questions all the time. How should we be eating before, during, and after training, or for a racing session? And this is the biggest question, and it cannot be answered in one line. It definitely cannot. It takes a lot of thought, and everybody is unique, and everybody is different, and everybody has different requirements. And there's quite a few considerations that need to be taken into account. So let's have a look at the first consideration. And one of the considerations when somebody's going to train or when somebody's racing, it's very important to understand meal timing. That's very critical, because if you're going to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and train, or you're going to wake up at 8 o'clock in the morning and train, or 10 o'clock you're going to go and train, or in the afternoon you're going to go and train, the timing of meals is very critical. So in the morning, generally, if it's a very early morning and it's a short run, possibly you might not need to eat. You can just go out on water. You don't need much anyway. I mean, you can come back and have a recovery meal. But if you're going to be training much later on in the day and you're waking up early, it's possible that you are going to eat beforehand. And then the time from that meal to when you're going to train is going to play quite an important role. And the other thing you need to take into consideration is if you are training in the evening, you need to be able to eat through the day to support that. There's no point in going and eating a big steak an hour before you go into a track session at night. And I think Raymond and Prodigal will quite agree with that. But and one of the other things is also weather conditions. Temperature plays quite an important role. So from an hydration perspective, if it's an extremely hot day, you'll need to obviously focus on some sort of and hydration plays a very critical role when it comes to nutrition, and this is something else that needs to be taken into account. The next thing you need to ask yourself is how long the session is, and session time is something that is very important, because if you're going on a 60-minute session or a 2-hour session, you might decide that you don't need fueling, but if you're going on a long session, which is 3 hours or over, and then you're obviously going to look at fueling, and one of the other things you need to look at is when your next session is going to be as well. The intensity of that session, so the pace that you're performing at, plus the length of time of that session, is going to determine the type of fuel that you require. If you let's say you're an elite athlete and you're running at 4 minutes a K on a training session, and it's going to be a 20 or 30 kilometer run, you might just go on water. But if you're going to run at that pace and you're going to go 55, 60 kilometers, it's going to be a different story altogether. You are going to test nutrition, and you are going to take a nutrition en route. Some elites train twice a day, so if they are going to train later on, they will definitely feed themselves during a training session, which is actually being utilized to help keep their body stable so that later on they've actually recovered properly for their next training session. And that's the next slide. When is your next session? Are you doing a single training session, a double training session, or are you doing a Kenyan day, a triple training session? You really need to decide how you're going to fuel yourself in an early morning session if you're still going to be training on late in that day. And everybody's different, but if somebody's going to be doing a 2-hour hard session in the morning and then another hour and a half or 2-hour session in the evening, I think very, very much they would have to fuel themselves in that morning session to be able to recover properly for that evening session. So that would be maybe fueling during the session and recovery, but everybody is unique in that way. And then one of the other things to decide on is fuel type, and everybody's different. And the two types of fuel that we always look at are liquid feed or solid feed, and this will really be completely dependent on your pace and also your ability to digest what you're taking in. So one of the important things is to note is that generally the pace that you're running at will generally will basically be will automatically help you select that, because if you're running at a very high pace, you're breathing, your airways have to be open completely, and to actually chew on something is not so simple, especially if you've got to chew for a while. You'll end up closing the airways, and it's not so suitable. So one of the very important things to understand is the type of pace you're going to be running at. If you speak to any of the elite runners running Comrades, generally it's liquid fuel. But if you're running at a controlled pace and you're breathing quite comfortably, there's no reason why you can't take in food solids, and it's probably a better idea because your digestive system actually caters for that. You basically eat food solids during the day already. You're not eating, you're not drinking liquids through the day, except for maybe hydration purposes. You're not getting your food source from liquids all the time. So I think it would be far more suitable to, if you have got the ability to take in food solids. Recovery is another very, very critical aspect of training and racing. And as an endurance athlete, I cannot stress enough how important it is. A lot of people don't understand how critical recovery is. It is so critical to recover, and there's 4 types of recovery in actual fact. And I've listed them here one slide after the other just to touch on them a little bit and just to give you some food for thought. So the first is rehydration, and that's replacement of lost fluid. Very important post-exercise is to obviously rehydrate yourself. During training or racing, there's no ways you take in the exact amount of fluid that you're losing. If you are, you probably land up in trouble because you're probably going to land up in a overhydrating situation. There are some athletes that intimately know how much fluid they lose under various temperatures, and they're able to replace quite a fair amount. But generally, when we finish an event, I mean, at Comrades, you probably could finish at least between 4 to 6 kilograms lighter afterwards, and most of that is actually due to fluid loss. So rehydration is the first point of recovery. Glycogen replenishment, if you do a very hard, high-intensity session and you're not fueling yourself during, you possibly will chew up quite a bit of your glycogen. If you've got a session later on, you'll want to try and get those glycogen stores topped up as much as possible. Some athletes, I know that they actually deplete glycogen over a period of time, and then they hit a period of fatigue. So it does take time for the glycogen levels to top up again. Generally, an athlete can probably run about 90 minutes. A well-trained athlete can probably do up to 2 hours on his glycogen stores alone. And after that, I mean, there is glycogen depletion, and it's not a pleasant feeling when you do deplete your glycogen stores, because you hit the wall, you feel a complete loss of power and complete fatigue sets in. And it does take a while for the brain to slow down the body and actually start to look at other sources, such as fat, as a source of fuel. Recovery, blood glucose stabilization is another one. So obviously, and I deal with people all the time, low blood sugar, post-exercise, taking some sugar or taking some carbohydrates to get yourself stable again. And obviously, that depends on the kind of intensity you've performed at. Mostly for Comrades training, it's not generally very high intensity training, depending on the kind of athlete you are. But for some people, especially if you're doing a very high intensity session, there is a need to recover your and stabilize blood glucose. And then the last one is muscle resynthesis. And obviously, muscles require protein in order to be able to resynthesize. It's quite interesting in actual fact. We registered one of our products in Europe, and they were giving us hassles with the word recover, because protein post-exercise in Europe is not allowed to be considered as a recover product. And the reason being is that the sports scientists have said, and this hasn't changed, that protein immediately post-exercise does not recover you. In actual fact, the amount of protein you consume from the time you wake up in the morning until the time you go to sleep at night is actually the amount of protein that the body requires. And it doesn't matter if you're taking protein immediately afterwards or you're taking a little bit later, it will be utilized when it's needed. And protein has to be processed. It cannot be stored. It has to be processed. So either it's going to be utilized, that whatever is not utilized will be converted into glucose, and after it's sitting in your system in the form of glucose, it will be utilized to top up glycogen levels. If it is not utilized to top up glycogen levels because they're already topped up, it will be stored as fat. So if you think that eating large pieces of meat is going to keep you nice and lean, it's actually the opposite. If you eat excess protein, you will gain weight, and that is a fact. So an athlete should take in the right amount of protein that's needed for his particular body. And generally for an endurance athlete, we can look at anywhere between probably around 1.1 to 1.4 grams per kilogram of body weight, but some people go up to about 1.7 if they want a bit more lean muscle mass, up to even about 1.7 grams per kilogram of body weight. So just to have that in mind. On the hydration side, this is a very important factor, especially in leading up to an endurance event. You should probably try to take in around 30 to 40 milliliters per kilogram of fluid per day. And so that means if you weigh 60 kilos, you should be drinking anywhere up to close to 2 liters of fluid a day. And that is not in the form of alcohol. It's in the form of fluid is what's required. So water, some herbal teas maybe. I wouldn't look at taking anything that's very high in caffeine, because caffeine can act as a diuretic. So you might not necessarily be hydrating yourself. One of the things that I find that's very, very critical, especially when trying to plan a nutrition program, is that a lot of people actually get very confused between energy and hydration requirements. If you're relying on liquid for your calorie intake, you can land yourself up in trouble. And the reason I say that is because generally it very much depends on the amount of fluid you're going to be taking in on a day. If it's very cold weather and you actually got water bottles with energy drink in, and you're taking in a lot less calories because you're sipping on less fluid, it can actually impact you quite significantly later on. And just a simple example, if it's freezing cold, if it could be 3 or 4 degrees and you're drinking less water, and you've got calories sitting in the form of carbohydrates in a water bottle, and you're only drinking a couple of maybe 100 or 200 milliliters every hour, you're probably getting hardly any calories into the system. So basically, you're pretty much running on water. On a hot day, you probably won't have a problem because you'll be drinking a lot more, but you always need to separate out your calorie intake from your fluid intake, and that's something that's very important to take note of. So on a colder day, you might want to stick to more food solids, or you want to maybe take in something that's in the form of recognizable calories where you're able to get it down, not depend on water and able to be able to get it down. And I think that's something that is very, very important. We touched on it earlier, food solids versus liquids, and I think it's very important for you to decide, can you eat food solids? And there are benefits behind it, and one of them I mentioned earlier is the digestive system's already accustomed to food solids. Our bodies are completely used to eating solids consistently. It gives you a sense of comfort, of hunger, of fullness, of stability and enjoyment. En route at Comrades is definitely bananas and potatoes as an example. Some of the athletes absolutely love eating them as they go along route. But you need to decide if you are a food product person. I personally believe food solids early on are quite a good idea under controlled pace, and maybe when you don't feel like eating anything anymore, then maybe resort to more of a liquid feed. But if you're running at a very high intensity and you need to keep the airways open, then the liquids become a far better option. One of the big factors that I deal with all the time is I get a lot of people telling me that you need to take in between 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour. And to be quite honest, I don't know many runners specifically that would be able to even manage this. Maybe more suited to cyclists or triathletes. However, there's no such thing as taking in the amount of carbohydrates that you feel that you need. You need to, and when I say that, I mean that it's easy to shove 60 or 90 grams of carbohydrates into your mouth. But the question is, how is your body going to respond to that? In other words, has your body got the ability to digest and absorb and utilize those carbohydrates? So if you're putting 60 grams of carbs into your body and your body is only capable of absorbing and utilizing 30 to 40 of it, you've got this other excess of 20, which is just going to build up constantly all the time. And one of the things I tell people is if you really want to play with intake, whether it be fats or carbs or proteins, whatever you will need to do, you definitely have to attempt to use it during training. You need to use it during training. You definitely don't try something new on race day, and you definitely need to stick to it. So don't be fooled into thinking. In actual fact, most runners that I work with, especially some of the elites, in actual fact, we've seen measurements anywhere between 30 to probably up to about 55 to 60 grams. So it really, really depends on the person and what they're capable of. I just touched on this now, and we're going to go into a bit of an open forum discussion with Raymond and Prodigal and Shaun now. But one of the things that I did mention is that you never arrive at a race or a match or anything without a planned nutrition strategy for the day. And nutrition has to be planned for the event. There are so many times when I'm standing at an expo, especially at Comrades, and a guy comes up to me and he says to me, I need your help. I'm running Comrades on Sunday. Please can you tell me what to eat? And I just cannot believe that the guy's been training for Comrades for 5 or 6 months, and he's never ever tested out his nutrition during training that he wants to actually try and attempt to do on Comrades Day. And that is the most critical thing. I can't stress it enough. You need to test it, and there's so many ways of testing it. So I've just put a few notes here. You've still got some time to test nutrition out before the big day. Take notice of what you're consuming during training in the form of liquids and solids under various weather conditions. Also take note of your energy levels before, during, and at the end of your session. If you finish strong, it's always a good sign. If you finish and you're feeling stable and you're not nauseous and you're not dizzy and you're not in a little bit of distress, then you should be feeling really good. Then you can actually bank that nutrition program. And the best way to test it is to pick a long training session, which could maybe mimic your racing conditions. Eat what you would eat as a pre-training meal before the race. Go out fairly hard, slightly probably below race pace, and fuel as you would during the race. If you feel strong at the finish, then bank the nutrition plan. And I think that's generally a nice way of actually just getting yourself right for the big day. I'm actually going to bring in Raymond, and then we'll Ray, can you hear me there? Ray?
I can hear you.
How's it, Ray? So, I mean, I'm not going to talk about suggested prep before the events yet. I think we'll bring us all into that. But based on what we've gone through now on the nutrition side and the training and that, and actually testing your nutrition during training, have you got any points that you'd like to put across to the audience?
Yeah, I think you've pretty much. I think you've done a good job in covering most of the bases. I think the absolute key is to test test various nutrition strategies. Try different foods, see how the body responds, see how the stomach responds. I think one of the challenges with something like Comrades is that you obviously can't go out and do a 90K training run pre-Comrades. So normally beyond 60, it's you kind of have to listen to the body and adapt your training strategy then. So I agree with you on your point in plan your strategy in advance, but I don't necessarily agree with stick to it through the race. I think you have to listen to the body, as you get longer into the race in terms of what it needs. It might be needing more solids, it might need more liquids, it might need you to actually stop your carbohydrate intake completely, get your system back, and then get back onto your strategy. So I think a lot of Comrades has to be adapted as you go, but I think you've got to go in with a plan, and then feel free to adapt it as you go. To go in there without a plan is crazy and is a disaster waiting to happen. On that basis, and you covered it, is that you don't bring in anything new on race day. So you stick to what you've tried. You stick to what's worked, and you don't try anything new on race day. I remember Comrades once where I craved salt and vinegar chips, and that was at about, I think it was 65 or 70 Ks. I absolutely craved them, and I actually saw some salt and vinegar chips along the way, and I took a handful of them, and it was the worst possible thing I could do. So you've got to stick to what has worked and what you have tried, and beyond 60 you can be a bit more flexible there, but I wouldn't try, for example, you start craving a beer, I wouldn't stop and have a beer. Stick to what you've tried and what has worked, and what the body accepts and the stomach is comfortable with.
And personally, I mean, from a liquid feed or a solid feed or a combination of both, what would you suggest?
Look, I think the longer you're out there, the more solids you're going to need.
Okay. I mean, I think also that with Comrades, I mean, if you're not an elite, I don't know if you agree, but you really are running at a controlled pace where you've got the ability to eat food solids en route. There's no real puffing and panting significantly. Sorry, Ray. I think that the audio disappeared for a second.
Yeah, I lost you there.
So I was just saying that when you're running Comrades, I mean, your pace is controlled. So I guess it's
Yes,
probably a lot easier to keep the airways open and still get food solids in.
well, look, I mean, there isn't a client that I coach where I don't advise a run-walk strategy. You know, I think there's very few athletes that can go out there and run from beginning to end. You know, for the majority of the guys out there, you're wanting to adopt a run-walk strategy. Now, run-walk strategy is great because during your walk sections, it's quite easy to fuel up properly, get some decent liquid in, get a quarter of a sandwich or whatever it is in, or some nuts or whatever you choose to eat. You know, so a run-walk definitely makes it a lot more conducive to that kind of thing. I just find personally for myself that you know, when I start feeling hungry in the run, it's best for me to eat even just something very small. I mean, it might be 2 or 3 nuts, that I just have something in my stomach. Because if I ignore that and I have those hunger pains later on, I start to feel nauseous and I just can't shake that nausea. So for me, it's quite important to get just some solid. It doesn't have to be anything big, just something in, so that I've got some solid sitting in my stomach. But as I say, the longer you're out there, I think the more you're going to need, you know, to have some solids through the day, and you would alternate it with liquid and solid. You know, you might have 3 handful of nuts along the way, for example, spaced out over the 90 Ks. You know, or you might have some bolts on a dry horse at halfway, for instance. You know, so it doesn't have to be anything huge or complex.
Okay, thanks, Ray. And then I've got Shaun on the line as well. Shaun, what do you, I mean, what, from an on-race point of view, how are you with, I mean, what did you suggest? I mean, what do you generally do?
Yeah, a lot less scientific than a few years ago, and I used to go into great detail and even go so far as to take blood sugar tests at regular intervals along the way to see how I respond to different concentrations of carbohydrates, different volumes over those long runs, and test it out properly before race day. But I definitely can't comment on solids and taking solids in because it's not something I've ever tried. I'm not a qualified coach either, so I don't deal with enough athletes to advise them as well on that, but I'm sure there's definitely a place for it. I think I've tried and keep it really as simple as possible now. I think to advise one person to the next on how much liquid you take and what sort of percentage of carbohydrate you need to be taking in is going to be very difficult because that's going to vary from one individual to the next. So it's based on a number of factors, obviously their ability and race pace they're taking on, their size of the runner, their weight, and all those kind of things. But I think a good sort of tip for anybody running Comrades and taking in fluids and carbohydrates is always just, you can feel comfortably full, and that's when you know you don't push it. At the moment, the last few years, I've been taking drinks at 6 kilometer intervals, and I take a drink of about 400 mils of the Accelerate mix, and I don't necessarily drink the whole. I drink as much of that 400 as full, and I feel that my stomach is comfortably full, and I know there's enough in there to get me through to the next bottle that I'm going to take. And then I'll take random amounts of water in between along the way. And that's enough to fuel me. But on a race like Two Oceans now, which is very different, Comrades, it's a slightly higher intensity, and also I have the problem where I don't have access to seconds. I carry a tube of Accelerate tabs, and an hour before the run I'll have 500 mils of Endure, and that'll get me through the first hour of the race, where I'll sip on just water in that first hour. And then I'll just take a tab, an Accelerate tab, every approximately 5K interval. And running at a fairly high intensity, it's more than adequate to get me to 56 k's that way.
No, that's what I wanted to tell people, because you're running about 6.5 hours, or, well, I mean, I think last year you ran a 6.5, if I'm not mistaken. Close to.
Yeah, down run 6:39, I think, last year, and then
Okay.
up run was 6:46. So in that sort of ballpark, yeah.
Okay, so, but that was a hellish uprun. Hopefully this year it's not going to be as bad. But all right, so that's interesting. So, right, I mean, I just want to bring Prodigal on, and then I've got a question for all of you. Prodigal, are you there?
Yes, Mark, I'm here.
How's it? So Prodigal, I mean, you also, you run at a very high intensity. I mean, you ran a 5:38 or 39 last year.
Yeah, 5:39.
Yeah, which is a phenomenal time. I'm very proud of you. Got a nice, awesome gold medal. And, I mean, on route, I mean, I actually fed you a little bit on route, but generally, I mean, you guys obviously have to wait the seconds. But do you guys, I mean, some of the runners that I feed definitely do take in a little bit of food solids. But you personally, I mean, you seem to be more of a liquid feeder.
I never ate before, Mark, but now I'm taking a food bar at halfway. I found it working for me.
Okay, so you're taking in something that's got fat and protein in, which makes you feel a little bit fuller.
Yes, and I'm taking Endure every 15 kilometers if I'm running Comrades.
Okay, which is for you quite a frequent feed. So that's one of the questions I wanted to ask, and you guys are all you guys are all in here at the moment. I haven't muted any of you. So on the frequency of feeding, Shaun, you drip feed. I mean, you're feeding very, very frequently, in actual fact. So I mean, that's something that I do recommend to runners, is rather, instead of letting the peaks and troughs between feeds become too far apart, which make you feel terrible later on, I find that in an ultra event or a long event, probably with me personally, I like to feed every 20 to 30 minutes. I find that I just like to keep it completely, keep my stomach feeding all the time, that I'm getting something into the system. Ray, I mean, are you in line with feeding frequently, or do you prefer to push it out a little bit?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think it depends to a large extent on, on how adapted your system is and what you're feeling on. So for me, I like to keep things as, as low GI as possible. So I don't have those, those spikes, those insulin spikes. That keeps the energy a lot more consistent and a lot more stable. I have found that on a low-carb, high-fat diet, that I find that the energy levels stay a lot more constant. And the only time I really feel like I start craving sugar is when I'm feeling, when things are starting to get a bit tough in a race. And my feeling there is that you start craving sugar at that point, not because you're in a sugar low or because you're in a trough.
Right?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, it sounded like a train was coming past.
I think that's...
my feeling is that when you're... Okay. So my feeling is that if you're fat adapted and you start craving sugar, I don't believe that your body is needing sugar. I think what's happening is you're starting to feel, you're in a place in a race where you're starting to feel, things are quite tough. You're starting to, go into quite a tough space. And I think your brain is then, you start to crave comfort food. You start to crave feel-good food, which is essentially where that sugar craving comes from. I've seen that in my own running. So for me, I tend to fuel over quite long spaces. I don't fuel all that regularly, so it will be probably something like every 18 Ks, that kind of thing. So I might have an 18K liquid intake and then a 25K solid intake. And then a halfway liquid or protein type liquid intake, and then a solid at perhaps 55, 60. So I tend to space my my intake a lot further. In the attempt just to keep that energy a little more stable and consistent.
Yeah, okay, and I think that it's very important to stress that if you're a very fat adapted athlete like you probably don't have to feed as frequently because you are fat adapted. I mean, I know that me personally, I'm also quite a fat adapted athlete, so I can wake up in the morning, have a sip of water or green tea and go for a 30, 40 kilometer run on water, come home and then eat a meal, and I feel actually very comfortable, no issues at all. And but people that are far more carbohydrate dependent will probably have these cravings and the tendency to, or the need to eat a lot more frequently. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why, to a large extent, your nutrition on race day, is quite dependent, and in terms of what you're taking in, it's quite dependent on the sort of diet you've been following. So, if you've been following a low-carb, high-fat diet, and now you come to race day and you're eating high carbohydrate, unless you're running at a high intensity, I'm not convinced that's the right way to go. When you're running at a high intensity, the later sort of following is to train low and then race high. But when you're running at a slower intensity, the debate, I guess, is what is considered a fast intensity and what isn't. Now over Comrades, you're running a 7.5 hour. I'm not convinced that's a high intensity. You start going below 7 hours, then I think, you're starting to get into a higher intensity. But certainly your diet coming into Comrades is quite important in terms of what you're going to be doing on race day.
Agreed. Okay, so you mentioned protein intake at halfway. Prodigal, I know you definitely also like to, I think, take in protein. We do serve the guys protein en route. I mean, what's your take on that? Sorry, Prodigal, I've actually, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Mark.
Prodigal,
Yes, Mark, can you hear me?
Yeah, I know that like when I fed like Claude, Mashiwa, and Ludwig and those guys, they definitely do take some protein shakes en route. In actual fact, the 1 year Claude was taking a lot of protein en route. It was a combination. It was a shake of protein and carbohydrates. You personally, do you like to get some protein into the system to feel a bit more stable?
Yes, Mark, I do take it halfway. And
Okay.
I also take the Trumec tablets for cramping.
Yeah, no, you battled for years with the cramping. So, yeah, we'll get into cramping just now. In actual fact, it's quite interesting. Actually, Raymond and I had a discussion about it today. But one of the things actually is, and I spoke to Raymond about this today, is I had somebody contact me who was running an ultra, and the guy completely overloaded on sugar. Like really, the glucose intake was really excessive for an ultra marathon, for a slow runner, and one of the things that you will feel from taking in too much glucose, that you, I think the sound is gone down again. Sorry guys, I think the sound, the internet's terrible. So I just wanted to. Yeah, I'm back now. I just wanted to mention that one of the things is that we saw this guy was taking in too much glucose, and he felt extremely nauseous as the run went on. And that's just because the amount of glucose coming into his system was not being utilized at all. It was actually building up over a period of time. And if you do feel nauseous en route, that's possibly something that you would need to look at. That you've been taking in too much glucose, en route, and to me, Comrades Marathon, I don't, unless you're an elite athlete, I don't think gels or really these high glucose products are going to pay a huge benefit. Like Raymond mentioned, you should probably look at more stability carbohydrates, because Comrades is really a fat fueled event. It is not really a carbohydrate fueled event. Ray, I mean, you would probably agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. As I say, that's why for me there's a big question mark around we talk about, well, at high intensity you need carbohydrate. For me, there's a big question mark around, well, when exactly does it become a high intensity run?
I think about lactate threshold maybe.
Yeah, well, that's it. And you're not going to be doing that over Comrades, So for the bulk of the field, you should be primarily burning fat through that race. And the last thing you're doing is blocking it by too much carbohydrate intake.
Okay, all right. Well, that's great. So I just want to run through some of these slides here quickly. We'll go and we'll have a discussion. So, weeks before the event, if we're speaking about nutrition, I think you guys, if it's like 2 or 3 weeks out, you should start really making sure your diet is a lot cleaner. One of the things that I've noticed with Comrades and even personally is illness can set in very, very quickly. It happened to me last year. I had to pull out. I got terribly sick about 10 days before, and I know that my immune system took a hammering. So I think that's quite an important thing, and definitely what you eat is going to play a critical role. It's no use in going and having Kentucky Fried Chicken and McDonald's burgers leading up to the event. You should try and stick to healthy foods, very good green vegetables, and try and eat things that will keep your immune system up. Make sure you hydrate. There's no need to overeat either. I think a lot of people stress about that. I put the slide in because the weeks before Comrades are obviously, the few weeks before are obviously going into a taper period, so your training time starts to come down, and then your total volume comes down, so you need to maximize rest and recovery, and the only other thing you can do is really sharpen and actually watch your nutrition, and I think those are the two critical things, and there's no need to overeat during that period. In actual fact, you should just eat normally. Try and just keep your, just for maintenance purpose, keep the weight consistent and just eat healthy, make healthy food selections. I'm going to ask Raymond and the guys about how they sharpen coming into Comrades as well. Days before the event, I think keep eating clean, hydrate properly. I have only put avoid caffeine there for one reason and one reason only. If you are, first of all, it does impact sleep, so you should probably reduce it a little bit. But if you're a big coffee drinker, then don't definitely cut it out the days before the event, because you'll actually get very irritable caffeine cravings. But one of the things that I just wanted to mention is that caffeine can play a huge benefit in a endurance event. Caffeine's got the ability to, first of all, free up a lot of free fatty acids. If you are caffeine intolerant, and the other thing is that it can actually wake up the brain as well, taking it during the event. So there are a lot of people. James Cunningham is one of our athletes. He's an Ironman athlete. In actual fact, he in a talk a couple of weeks ago, he told the audience, "I only take caffeine on 12 days of the year, and those are his race days. He doesn't drink it any other time." So I think it's quite important to note that that could be you can benefit from it, but don't go, if you're going to look for that benefit, you should try and reduce your caffeine intake probably quite a few weeks before the event, and definitely not try and do it the week before the event.
Just to add in there quickly, Mark, obviously, just going back to what we said earlier, that you have tested that on race day.
100%, because caffeine is acidic. It can play with the stomach as well. You need to try it in training.
Yeah, so we were running Boston, I think it was through about 25 Ks or 32 Ks, somewhere around there. They were handing out these caffeine shots, and I was very tempted to grab one, but I hadn't tested it in training. I had no idea what my system would do, so I ran right on by it. So as long as you've tested in training, 100%, then I think there can be some benefit.
Agree 100%. Sorry, I just see here, Shaun, did you want to say something? I've got your hands raised.
Yes, sure. I spoke to you after Oceans, and it's the first time I've tried the G-shot in a race conditions, and I took one at 28 Ks, and I stormed over Oakhops of that. So I'd like to know what happened. And I had another one probably just before going up to Southern Cross Drive, and also ran that section really well. I think in the whole sort of from 30 k's to the end, I think maybe one guy passed me on the road, and I don't know if I was just having a really good run or if that played a part, and why.
Look, you could have just had a very good run. I wouldn't just boil it down to taking in a guarana shot en route. But look, caffeine. If you're not a big coffee drinker and you don't take in a lot of caffeine, and you do take it in, and it's not going to impact your stomach. It does wake up the brain, and when it does wake up the brain, it definitely gives you a sense of euphoria and that ability to be able to push yourself a little bit. So it does have a benefit from a mental perspective, taking it during an event. I've got some athletes that take anywhere up to 160 milligrams of caffeine per an hour in like an 8 or 9 hour event, which is a lot. I mean, it's a huge amount. So I think it just depends on the person, but maybe it did benefit you. Have you tried it since in training or not yet? Shaun?
No, not since then. I'd only tried it a couple of times before that, but only up to sort of 30k runs. So yeah, I thought that I had sort of in my sort of race plan for Two Oceans, and in any ultra event, I think from sort of 30k's to the marathon, that's really where you start concentrating hard and focusing, and maybe that was it. There was a little bit of benefit there, and it aided me when I had to put my head down and concentrate hard. I wasn't running necessarily faster than I was at any other stage in the race. I was probably a little bit more focused, and yeah, it paid dividends definitely.
Okay, all right, well, that's interesting. Look, I mean, for me, caffeine works, but I have tried it quite a bit during training, and I think that's quite important. Just, I've got a question here. There's a guy who's aiming for 11 hours, and maybe you guys can answer. Usually use 1 gel per hour in water, no Coke, and a meal replacement bar every 3 hours. Do you feel that this is enough? My answer, the guy's name is Bruce. Bruce, I mean, my personal answer to you is if it's working for you during training, especially your long training runs, then I think that would be fine to use during Comrades. And I think Raymond mentioned earlier on, also try and listen to the messages that your body gives you, because you do start to crave certain things. But if you've tried this during training and it is working for you, then I feel that it would probably be the best to stick to something like that in race day. Raymond, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I think that sounds fine to me. I think the key there for me is that he's not mixing Coke and goose. I think that's where a lot of runners go wrong, is they start mixing Coke and goose, and they start getting a sugar overload. So to me, a goo an hour and with water in between is giving you more than enough carbohydrate. It sounds like a good way to go to me.
Yeah, and I think the meal replacement bar is actually quite good, because you're getting some nice food solids into the system, and a meal replacement would be a nice, probably a nice ratio of proteins, fats, and carbs in there. And I don't think you can go wrong with having it's like nearly in a way it's a meal that you're taking en route, and I think that's it's definitely a good option to go, without a doubt. Just something that I want to mention is when you do take in a gel, you need to make sure that you do consume it.
Yeah, one of the other options.
Sorry, Ray, I can't hear you.
So I was just saying, one of the other options, for the meal replacement bar is great. And you might want to have that, slightly earlier, as I say, when you start feeling hungry, and then perhaps later on to split it. Or, if you battle with solids, then something like Ensure, which is a proper meal replacement drink, and not just a, protein recovery type shake, which tends to have a lot more sugar. But Ensure meal replacement is also a very good way to, to get some equivalent in, without having the solids. If you struggle with that, that solidness, having those solids lie in the stomach.
Yeah, so a meal replacement in the form of fluid, which is quite. That's why, in actual fact, that's one of the reasons why we use the recover shake on meat, because it's got the protein and the carbs and a little bit of fat in. But agreed. I mean, sometimes in the form of a liquid, it's actually easy on the digestive system as well, especially later on when you can't eat or if you don't feel like eating. So just something that I wanted to go in, because there's another question now. Is Wendy actually asked about suggested fueling and pre-race meals, and this is something also interesting. I saw today that somebody had actually mentioned that they had eaten their pre-race meal about 75 minutes before their race, and that is completely it's off the mark. You need to have that meal consumed a minimum of 2 hours before the start of that event, because that food needs to get into your system and it needs to start emptying from your digestive tracts, and nutrition needs to get into the system to be able to actually fuel the body, and it needs to be at least 2 hours. And if it's going to be around 2 hours before, then I would say you need to aim for around 400 calories, maybe a little bit more if you're a bit of a bigger person, maybe 450. Interestingly enough, like and I mentioned this, not that you guys or any of you cycle, but at Tour de France, they start stage races a lot later. Cyclists can eat 4 hours earlier, and if they eat 4 hours before, they actually take in 1,000-calorie meal about 4 hours before the race. So the further away from the race, the higher the calorie, but when it's getting closer to the race, you've got to obviously reduce the amount of intake. And then I think it should be a stability meal, nothing that's going to spike your blood sugar excessively. Raymond touched on that. Stability carbohydrates. I like to take in something that's going to have quite a nice amount of fat. I like taking in some medium chain triglycerides, obviously a little bit of protein. I do have a slightly higher carb portion, but I use a low GI carbohydrate combined with fat and protein, so I keep the insulin levels quite low. I definitely don't spike your blood sugar levels before the event. And I've just put a few examples of some suggested meals. There's plenty to go with. If you eat eggs on toast and that's your meal, or you just eat eggs and salmon and that's your meal, whatever it is, and if you can't eat solids, then make yourself a shake. There's plenty of different meals. Ray, what do you usually do before a race? What would you suggest?
Yeah, I agree. You want to stay away from high carbohydrates that are going to spike that insulin. The problem with spiked insulin is that it blocks you from burning fat. So the moment that insulin spikes, your body immediately goes into carbohydrate mode. So the last thing we'll be doing is starting a 90K race burning carbohydrate. You want to be burning fat from the word go. So you want to keep your meal low carb, high fat. So I generally will have something like scrambled eggs and butter. I might have a meal replacement or protein shake with that. Maybe a few nuts, but anything that's that's not going to spike that insulin. Be careful with bananas. Guys like to smash bananas and potatoes before a race. Those break down quite quickly into sugar and will spike the insulin. So be careful with the amounts that you have there. The fat that you add with it reduces that glycemic index. But yeah, the last thing you want to do is toe that line, and you're burning your glycogen from the word go.
Yeah, so remember that carbohydrate intake excessive mitigates fat burn. And you should remember that during training as well, because if you are planning on slimming down and burning off fat, and at least reducing your body fat, you don't want to be spiking blood sugar by any means during training. So that's quite important. And as Ray touched on there, I mean, to pop a gel at the start of Comrades, not even the elite athletes do that. It's just not. It just doesn't happen. Maybe the rabbits will, because they're running at a high pace to catch those hot spots, but they're running at a very high intensity. So very, very different. I'm just going to ask Prodigal, are you there? Prodigal?
Yes, Mark. Yeah.
What do you generally eat before the race, and how long before your race? But just so the audience knows, your intensity is quite high. These guys run at 340 pace, by the way. So different ball game.
Yeah, it depends on the event. For a marathon, I'll eat 3 hours before. For Comrades, I eat 2 hours before the event. I normally eat 2 slices of bread with eggs, then 1 apple and 1 banana. Then after 30 minutes, I'll take 1 True Mac tablet, and I'll drink 500 ml of Enjoy.
Okay, so you actually take in a fair amount of carbs, but you also take in some protein as well. So, I mean,
Yes.
based on what you've told me, you're probably consuming around 600 calories, maybe even a bit more. But just so the audience knows, I mean, when these guys go out, they go out at a fairly high pace. It's a different ball game for an elite as opposed to you know, the general Comrades runners. I'm going to ask Shaun as well. Thanks, Prodigal. Shaun, are you there?
Yeah, I'm probably close to your option 2 that you got up on the slide at the moment. I'm at probably only 1 slice of rye toast there, and I'll slice up that banana and have it on the toast, and then I'll have a protein shake in place of the macadamia or nut butter.
Okay.
And that's 2 hours before. I've always had that over the years. At least 2 hours before the race starts, that's when I have my meal.
Okay.
I also have that drink with it as well that Prodigal has, the Endure, which is I take that an hour before the start.
Okay. All right. But the Endure doesn't spike your blood sugar. It actually keeps it keeps the insulin quite low in actual fact. So just we've got a question actually. One of the ladies, right? Raymond, you've been touching on this a lot, but consuming Coke with goose. I mean, I'm just saying that if you're consuming Coke with goose, it's very difficult to measure the amount of sugar going into your system. And to be honest, Nalin, if you're not running at a high enough pace and you're not burning off that amount of glucose that's going into your system, you are going to suffer later on in the race. I mean, there is no doubt. Raymond, I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah, the problem is that both of them are very, you know, they spike you. Both of them, you know, they immediately spike that energy level, you know, that insulin. The problem with, you know, that kind of a spike is that it's going to drop you, you know, very soon afterwards. So the problem with a gel and a Coke is that they spike you very quickly and then they drop you very quickly. So just as quick as it brings you up, it brings you down. Now the problem with, you know, starting to introduce that early on is that you need to keep it going, you know, because that energy level is now fluctuating at such a level, and that's why I always look to try and maintain an energy level where there's far lower fluctuations. You don't want these spikes and then these troughs and these spikes and these troughs. Generally, the higher GI stuff, so the Cokes and that kind of thing, I generally advise to start introducing that, you know, as late as possible into the race. So if you can hold that off to sort of 70, 75 kilometers, you know, and at that sort of level where you haven't got much further to go, and you at that point need to start, you know, you feel like you need to start boosting those levels, you know, that's when you take it. To then carry it through to the finish is not a problem. But if you're taking that at 10 kilometers in and you've got to now carry that through for another 80 kilometers, you're not going to be able to handle all of that carbohydrate, and you're going to start feeling nauseous and full and bloated, and you know your energy is going to be all over the place.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks. I've actually got another interesting question here, and one of the audience has actually asked. I'll answer it from my perspective. I definitely will ask Raymond and Shaun as well, but and even Prodigal. Is how do you know when you're fat adapted? And it's quite an interesting question. So just from my perspective, fat adaptation is one of those things that from a physiological perspective, there's differences. A lot of people think that fat adapted means that your ketone levels are high, but that's one option. That's one way of actually just providing your body fat for fuel. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily fat adapted. I mean, you can still be fat adapted even if you're not an excessively low carb, high fat eater. It really depends on how you train your mitochondria to obviously produce ATP to fuel the body. And the thing is that if if your mitochondria are predominantly using fat to produce energy, then you probably, then on a physiological level, you obviously are more fat adapted. But how do you know if you are fat adapted, just from the signs and the messages? And I can tell you something, it's quite easy. First of all, you don't have, number one, hunger cravings like a regular person would have. In actual fact, during a normal day, you can definitely space meals further apart. You tend to be able to be feeding on fat quite easily. And look, I'm a triathlete. I'm not just a pure runner. I know that because of fat adaptation, one of the things I do know is I can actually go on a ride or a run. Like I mentioned earlier, I can wake up in the morning. I can drink. I'll give you an example. I woke up when I was overseas about a year ago. I got up one morning. I had a glass of water, and I went and I ran a 42-kilometer training run. It was about 3 hours and 20 minutes or so. It was just a training run, nice controlled pace. I came back, and all I did was I just ate a nice recovery meal. That run was predominantly on fat. I was not really burning off any glycogen whatsoever, and I was really running at a controlled pace. Sometimes I can go on rides for 5 to 6 hours, take water only, and really that's fat adaptation. And one of the other things that I do know is that if I'm going at a very high intensity, and this is something that I use as a sign for me when I know that I'm fat adapted, is that I will deplete my glycogen stores at some stage. Even a fat adapted athlete will. But the thing is what you know is that at that high intensity, you generally go a little bit further, because at a high intensity, sometimes you can utilize a little bit more fat to try and spare the glycogen. So some people might blow at 90 minutes. Some people might go at around 2 hours. But the thing is that in actual fact, I'm so in tune with my body at the moment that I can feel when my glycogen stores have depleted, because automatically I cannot keep going at that high intensity. The brain actually slows the body down because you need to get more oxygen into the system, because oxygen is actually what allows fat usage. That's why at a controlled pace, if you can talk to your friend, you definitely shouldn't be taking any sugar. It slows the body down, and automatically there's a transition from glycogen usage over back to fat usage. But that transition for me is quite transparent. I know it's happening, and I get through it quite easily. But for a person who's actually not fat adapted, when they deplete their glycogen stores, they hit the wall completely, and they have got no energy whatsoever, and they walk around in a daze. If you're on a bicycle, you can't even put your foot down on the pedal. And if you're running, you don't even know what to do. You actually just land up walking. You can walk and sit on the side of the road, and it's a very painful process. It can take 20 or 30 minutes for that, for the liver to start actually getting involved into into processing triglycerides, and to obviously start utilizing fat. But the thing is that it's a really painful period. And I think that those are the key signs for me that show that somebody is pretty much fat adapted. It doesn't take a week, and it doesn't take 2 weeks or 3 weeks. It takes months of actually training correctly, eating correctly, and adapting your body to become more fat adapted. And the longer you do it for, the more fat adapted you become. Raymond, I mean, I know you've gone this route as well, so I mean, maybe you want to touch on that.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I think it's quite a difficult one to answer. It's probably more for someone like Tim Noakes. From a personal perspective, I think you definitely on feel. I think we need to just mention that you don't only. So I mean, Comrades training has a lot to do with training the body to be fat adapted. So if you're following a low carb, high fat diet, you're going on a very going on a specific route to become far more fat adapted. But when you're training for Comrades, and that's where your Comrades training pace becomes so important. All your long runs up to this point, all your easy runs, etc., should have been at your planned Comrades race pace. And the reason for that is A, to train your biomechanics from a muscular perspective to be able to run at your Comrades race pace, and B, to teach your body to burn fuel efficiently at that pace. So if you've been training for Comrades over the last couple of months, and you've been training at that Comrades race pace, etc., then your body is far more fat adapted without having to test ketones, etc., your body is going to be burning fat as an energy source. But I think, yeah, I mean, the way to check, or that you're fat adapted when you're able to go that much longer without hitting the wall or getting that dizzy feeling. You're able to run longer runs on just water, etc. You don't, you're not hungry all the time, etc. Those kind of signs. I mean, all the signs you talk about are very evident. But yeah, I think definitely the Comrades training, primarily is there to teach your body how to become efficient at that distance, both mechanically and from an energy perspective.
Assuming you're not training on sugar all the time.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, yeah, well, look, I mean, even where you're training on sugar, yeah, look, I mean, if you're training on I mean, if you're taking, high sugar every, 20 minutes, half an hour on your long training runs, well, yeah, then you're burning primarily, glycogen and glucose, etc. So, and that's what I said earlier, your day-to-day, how you've been living and how you've been training, etc., depends to a large extent what your nutritional strategy is going to be on race day. But yeah, so assuming you haven't been, force-feeding sugar on all your training runs, then, your body will be far more fat-adapted than not.
In actual fact, some elite athletes that do fuel on training runs but want to become fat adapted, they don't start taking in any fuel until they're about an hour to 2 hours into that run, so that they already start utilizing fat from the onset, that when they're taking in the glucose later, it's not going to really hamper the effect that they're actually trying to utilize fat as well. I mean, obviously depending on the things that they're taking in. There was one question saying, but if I'm not going to use goos and cokes, then what do I run up to 70 kilometers for? And I mean, me personally, and Raymond's mentioned this as well, is look at taking in stability carbohydrates that are not going to spike your blood sugar, not going to get your insulin levels all the way up, and actually try and keep you far more balanced. So there's two things that you need to look at. The one is the amount of carbohydrates you're consuming. So if you're taking, and I'll just use one of our products as an example, if you're taking our little chewable tablets, it's only a 4.8 gram carbohydrate tab. Because it's so small from a carbohydrate perspective, it's definitely not going to spike your blood sugar because it's so small, but it will give you a nice a stability feeling, and you can take it more over a frequent period of time. But if you wanted to take something that didn't spike blood sugar, you could look at, first of all, their food bars that are available. We sell something called chews, and the chews they've got a low glycemic index, but they provide stability, and they're probably quite easy to take in. I just don't see Comrades being a gel. It's definitely not a gel Coke onset from the beginning. If you really want the Coke and the gels, save it for the last 10 or 20 kilometers when you've got the legs to sprint to the finish. But you want to try and keep yourself as stable as possible. And I'll ask you this. When you're working during the day and you're working an 8 or 9 hour day, there's no ways you're living on goos and cokes. So when you're running Comrades for 8 or 9 hours, there's no need to, unless you're running at a very high pace, there's no reason to actually take in that amount. But if you wanted to take in something that would be sugary, I would say that a very small amount over a frequent period of time, so that, like as Raymond mentioned earlier, you don't want the peaks and troughs being too far apart. The question is, can you stomach it for 8 to 12 hours? And that's another question altogether, because if it gets to a stage where you can't stomach it anymore, you are going to land yourself up in trouble because you cannot stop the feed. So, I mean, Ray, I mean, you can, I don't know if you want to add to that, but that's my personal opinion on taking goos and cokes.
No, absolutely. That's exactly it. So it's not a case of, carbs are banned and I'm saying don't have carbs at all, etc. It's just, have the right carbs, the carbs that are not going to spike your energy, etc., that are going to keep you far more consistent. So yeah, they're going to bring your energy levels up and your energy levels are going to drop. But as much as they've come up is as much as they're going to drop. So it's not this massive swing in energy levels. You know, whereas a Coke is spiking you quickly, dropping you quickly. You know, whereas you take, you know, some of the chews or the tabs, etc. It's a small spike, small trough, small spike, small trough, you know, etc. So it's not a case of no carbs, etc. It's a case of, you know, you've been smart in terms of what you're taking. Once you hit that last sort of quarter or last third, you know, generally there, I mean, as I say, it's again, I believe it's more a mind thing and a craving. I mean, they've shown that sugar, you know, has the same impact on the brain as cocaine. So, you know, if you think about how you're feeling, you know, at 70 Ks or 75 Ks in, 80 Ks in, you know, you're feeling pretty crappy. And it makes sense that the brain then starts craving something that's going to make you feel good. Well, sugar makes you feel good. So you start craving the Cokes and the sweet stuff, etc., which then effectively gives your mind a little bit of a high. You know, but then it's a lot easier to maintain. You can maintain it for the last 20 Ks, but to maintain that for 90 Ks is going to land you in a bit of trouble. You're going to start to feel nauseous, etc. And a lot of time you'll see if you're I'd say around a 10 to a 12-hour runner, you will notice a lot of people, you know, throwing up at 60, 65 Ks. And it's purely because it's been a constant intake of sugar, and the body just can't take it anymore. And well, there's only one way for it to come out.
Thanks, Ray. I just wanted to touch on one other thing because I didn't mention it. I've got here suggested fueling in a pre-race meal. Something I wanted to talk about was the day before the event, because the day before the event, I get all these people attending pasta parties, overloading on carbohydrates and really upping carbohydrates. And I just wanted to touch on carbo loading a little bit, because that's something that actually wasn't mentioned at all. And I just personally, I don't believe there's a necessity to carbo load, because if you've tapered and you're eating regularly, your glycogen stores are going to be topped up anyway. So I think carbo loading, all it's going to do is actually build up your craving towards carbohydrates and actually allow you to actually gain some additional weight, which you're going to need to carry with you for quite a bit, especially if it's not glycogen weight, because that's another thing, is once your glycogen stores are topped off, you're going to actually gain weight which isn't glycogen, and they're going to have to run with that for 90 Ks. It's definitely not going to be easy. So I think one of the things is something that I do stress, is that the lunchtime meal and the dinner time meal the night before the race shouldn't be massive meals. In actual fact, one of the things you need to focus on the night before is actually eat quite a nice, small, comfortable meal. It doesn't have to be filling, because I personally believe that if you overeat, you're not going to be able to sleep, and I think you should try and get as much sleep the night before Comrades, as much sleep as you can. And definitely overeating and overdrinking is going to impact you. Rather, put your key focus into the pre-race meal, which is the following morning, and make that your critical meal before the run. But overeating the night before, I don't think is a necessity. Ray, I mean, the night before, the day before, I mean, what generally would you advise people?
Well, I think for any runner, the toilet is a big issue, you know, on a race. You know, that's something that we all want to avoid. We all want, you know, stomach to be cleared before we start that race. So you're going to have a massive meal the night before. You know, a good chance that stomach's not going to clear. So generally, I advise to have your main meal, so your supper, effectively to have it at lunchtime the day before, and then to have just a light meal at night. Just something to fill that hunger gap. You don't want to starve yourself before the run, but yeah, you don't want to eat unnecessarily, etc. But so big meal, your big meal or your supper at lunchtime, a light meal at supper, and then you'll find generally that your stomach clears and you feel light and ready to go in the morning. Then you can actually stomach a bit of a breakfast at 4 in the morning or 3 in the morning. Nothing worse than having a massive plate of pasta at 6 or 7 o'clock that night, and then a few hours later get up and try and shove food into your mouth at 3 in the morning.
Yeah, I agree with you. In actual fact, I always advocate that your lunchtime meal should be your big meal, and your dinner meal should be a very light meal. There's no need to overeat the night before. Shaun, I'm gonna bring you on as well. I just want to ask you, what do you do the day before or the night before? What kind of food do you generally eat?
Yeah, preferably it's at home. So it's difficult. Most people are traveling when they're coming down to Comrades. So you more than likely not going to have the meal that you're used to having at home. I'm fortunate I live down here, so I'm always going to have a home cooked meal. So it's always going to be something that I'm used to. And yeah, it's very plain and simple. I mean, when I went away now, I always keep on referring back to Two Oceans because that's the most recent race up Australia. And we stayed with my son as a student down at TCT, and so we went for a meal that we knew. We got a Woolies roast chicken and roasted vegetables, sort of everything in, and that was our sort of evening meal. And I think lunch wasn't too different either. So yeah, I think the rule of thumb is just to stick to what you're used to, which is not always easy when you're traveling, as I said. So yeah, I hope that helps.
And Shaun, size-wise, I mean, not a big meal. I mean, pretty like a...
No, you don't want to be, pigging and I think when people used to say 20 years ago, that was we always touched base with our friend in Cape Town, Prof. Noakes, and carbo loading was a big thing then, and people automatically assumed when you're carbo loading that you have to eat more. It's exactly not that. I think you just have a meal that you're comfortable with. Overeating on the evening before is, as Ray said, it's going to have consequences in the morning, and if it's not before the race, it's going to be somewhere along the route. Just eat a comfortable meal, not more. More is not better.
All right, thanks, Shaun. I'm just going to ask Prodigal as well now. Prodigal, what do you eat the day before the race, before Comrades, and the night before?
Yeah, I agree with Ray. My main meal is normally in the afternoons on lunch. Then later in the evening, I'll have a small meal.
Okay, thanks, Prodigal. I've just got I just want to run through these slides quickly. There's only like 2 or 3 slides left. So just remember that as far as race fueling goes, pace and time are quite critical when you're talking about what you're going to be eating en route. Liquid and solid feed or both, a caffeine option, and feeding frequency. Also, something I haven't mentioned is protein. Is a protein option. I just want to, there's one question before we go on to this slide that just somebody asked there the frequency of eating, and I think the frequency of eating personally depends on what you're going to be eating. And as Ray and myself also mentioned, and Shaun mentioned it earlier, the way he feeds as well. Shaun takes quicker releasing carbs, but he has small amounts more frequently. Raymond takes more stability foods, and he has them less frequently. So I mean, the thing is that if you're having a more of a stability food, you wouldn't have to feed as frequently. If you're having more of probably a sparking food, you would probably, yes, you would have to have it more frequently, but the volumes that you're taking would obviously have to be lower. You just definitely don't want to overload on something like that. Ray, I mean, can you touch on that? I mean, you mentioned it earlier. It's just one of the questions one of the audience has got.
Yeah, I think I think that pretty much covers it. I think in terms of how often you eat, etc. I mean, it's very dependent on the person. You got to go with what works for you. And that's where learning to understand what your body needs and requires in a long run is so important. So for me personally, I know without a doubt that I start to get hungry at between 18 and 23 Ks, without a doubt. And for me, if I don't eat at that point, then I have problems later on where I just can't get food down. So for me, I've got to eat something at that point. Anything small that I can just get in, just so that I've got something in my stomach at that point, and that kind of sets me up for the rest of the race. If I miss that slot, then I'll often come down with a hunger nausea, where I actually need to pull off to throw up, but there's nothing to throw up, and it's the worst feeling in a race. So you've got to kind of go with your body and how often you feel you need that fuel. I think a lot of the goos and cokes, etc., become a bit of a crutch for us, and so we almost feel like if we don't take them, we're going to crash and burn later. And that's not always the case. If we're taking the right stuff and we're keeping the energy levels consistent, then we begin to see the signs of, okay, I need to take in something now, or I don't, etc. So I think it's each person has to kind of understand what their body needs.
Thanks, Ray. And I think what Raymond mentioned is quite important. If you think you're going to crash and burn because you're not taking in goos, it's actually the opposite. You've got a higher chance of crashing and burning because you are taking them. And we sell gels as well. They do spike your blood sugar, but I definitely don't recommend them to a controlled pace runner. The only people that use those gels are really our elite athletes. And when an elite athlete comes along, and Prodigal will tell you this, we generally hold out about 3 options for them. I've got a protein shake, I've got a carbohydrate shake, and attached to one of those bottles will be a gel with it, or a food bar, or chews or something. And the athlete will take what he wants at that point in time, what he's feeling like using, but the options are there. And generally the gels only get taken by the rabbits, and I've noticed that. The guys that are going for the hot spots, they take the gels early on, but by the time they get to the last hot spot, remember, they've still got to finish the race. They slow their pace down, and then they start to take in proper food. And so, but generally the guys that are ill are the guys that, and you see it, that when I've been seconding before, they come over the hill and they go, don't show me sugar, I can't see sugar, I can't even look at it. And the reason being is that they've completely overloaded on it. There's no ways you're going to crash and burn, definitely not in the first 50 kilometers if you don't take in all that sugar. So I just want to talk about some common mistakes, and there's a few that I haven't put here, which I've got in mind, which came to mind after an email that I received. One of the things is you need to listen to your messages, and when I say that, I'm not talking about listening to your messages during the race. I'm talking about listening to your messages way before the race, so that you know what your body agrees to and what it doesn't. And one of the things that I've personally experienced in my life is that I've got an intolerance to wheat, for example, and I've got an intolerance to dairy. So I'm lactose intolerant. There's no ways I could take dairy before a race. There's a lot of people who are lactose intolerant, and they just they don't realize it, and it impacts them. A good friend of mine, and in actual fact, I'm not going to mention her name, but she's actually coached by Ray. Last year at Comrades, took in the cream with a coffee before Comrades, completely impacted her stomach during the race, and then that sort of, in a way, it ruined her Comrades. And interesting enough, it was diagnosed down to the creamer, which was because she's lactose intolerant. And then again this year at one of the Comrades qualifiers, where she was expecting a fast marathon, she this time didn't have creamer in her coffee, but she added milk to her cereal, and that ruined her Comrades qualifier. Now the thing is that when I say listen to your messages, what you take in that impacts you negatively, you need to try and identify what is impacting you negatively, and you need to cut it out of your diet. You can't keep utilizing something like that. So if you take something and it doesn't agree with you, and you try it again and it still doesn't agree with you, cut it out completely, because obviously your body is not tolerant of what you're consuming. Pre-race meal timing, like I said, I got an email today where a guy was taking it around 60 minutes before, 75 minutes before, way too close to the race. You really need to take your pre-race meal at least, it needs to be in your stomach 2 hours before, at the very least, and that's something. Hydration is another mistake that I personally see at Comrades. They space the water tables very close together. Last year I witnessed quite a large number of overconsumption of fluid, and interestingly enough, there was a large amount of people that were cramping last year, and when we analyzed some of the fluid intake, it was actually complete overhydration. So sometimes overhydration is not a good thing. Dehydration is actually fine. You will finish Comrades slightly dehydrated. I mean, it's very difficult to consume the exact amount of fluid that you're going to lose, and I wouldn't advise consuming fluid from every single water table you get to. I think the wise people will space them quite far apart and only drink when they actually require it. Definitely not taking in all the time. Glucose overload we've spoken about constantly. Temperatures play a very critical role. Remember, at Comrades, you can start in a cold weather, and as you go through the day, it starts to warm up. So your fluid intake, when it's early on in the race, will be a lot less than when it gets late on in the race. So don't overdo it when the temperatures are cold and you're not losing too much fluid. Ray, have you got anything to say on those points there? I mean, I've just touched on them. Maybe you've got something you want to add.
No, not really. I think it is an uprun, so chances are it's going to be slightly warmer at the start than a down run. Durban tends to be a lot warmer, so you tend to be running in fairly warm conditions from early on. For me, the Comrades tables come quite close together, so it's quite easy to overhydrate. So what I advise, it becomes quite difficult to start counting tables. Once you get in the middle of the race, I can't remember if I drank at the last table or if it was 2 tables ago. So, what's probably a bit easier is to just drink smaller amounts at every table. So 1 or 2 sips every table, and then go according to feel. So initially you need to start drinking, and it's small sips as the tables come and go. They start off a little more spaced in the beginning, but they quite quickly become every 1 kilometer or very close to. And then you really want to be sipping 2 or 3 sips at each stop, and then as you progress further and further into the race, you need to start going on feel, and the body will start telling you, are you taking on too much? Do you need to take on more, etc.
Okay, thanks, Ray. Just 2 points some points that I just wanted to mention, because one of them came up today is that, and I've seen this before, and I've heard this from many athletes before, and that's taking NSAIDs, which is basically a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, something like a Meiklejohn. As far as I'm concerned, they should be banned en route. Please, whatever you do, do not take medication like that. It can lead to kidney failure. It can lead to, you don't know what kind of medical trauma you'll land yourself up in. It is not worth taking any painkillers. If you can't handle the pain, then you shouldn't be doing Comrades. There's no reason whatsoever. So please, stay away from the Meiklejohns. I mean, Ray, you'll state this emphatically as well.
Absolutely. If you need an anti-inflammatory or painkiller to run Comrades, then you shouldn't be running. The risk is just not worth it. There's Comrades is not going anywhere. It's going to be next year. It's going to be the year after. And if you've got some injury that you're having to take stuff for, then you really shouldn't be running, in my opinion. It's really just not worth the risk. And the same goes for being sick, incidentally. If you're fighting flu, etc., and your heart is under strain, the last thing you want to do is risk it by running Comrades. I mean, every year we're seeing someone pass away because of that.
Sorry, Ray, we lost you there. I think just on what Raymond mentioned now, I mean, it's a very important point. I entered Comrades last year and the year before. 2 years ago, I was very, very ill. I was actually bedridden for quite a few months. I had quite a bad. Yeah. Ray, are you there?
I can hear you now.
Sorry, I lost you. So I just mentioned that what you stated is quite important. I entered Comrades in 2013 and 2014. Both years I couldn't run. 2013, actually, I felt very ill. I was actually nearly bedridden for about 4 or 5 months with a severe parasite infection, and I actually had to stop training for about 4 to 5 months. So there was nothing I could do. 2014, I actually had a very good. I had a nice Comrades qualifier. I was training nicely. Everything was sort of on target. And then I got a terrible chest infection about 10 days before the event. I didn't want to take antibiotics because I knew that if I did, it would be overs for me. I tried to go without it, and a few days later, the doctor insisted antibiotic treatment. Immediately, Comrades was out the window. But it's not something that I sit and I cry about, because your health has to come before putting yourself into a journey like this. And Comrades is a journey. Imagine driving your vehicle, and I use this always as an analogy. Imagine driving a vehicle from Joburg to Cape Town, and your rims are completely smooth, and your windscreen wipers aren't working, and it's going to be raining the whole way there. Chances are you aren't going to make it. So if you're putting your body through a 90-kilometer run, and you've got issues like windscreen wiper issues and smooth rims, etc., and you haven't gone for a proper medical, and you've got an underlying illness or a viral infection, you're absolutely crazy to even think about participating in the event. And I'm not just talking from an illness perspective. If you've got a knee niggle or an ankle niggle, and you need to be strapped up to run Comrades because there's no other way you're going to do it, I don't think you should be running Comrades as well, because the chances are by the time you get to the finish line, you might never be running again. You might exacerbate that injury to the extent that you're actually going to ruin your running legs for quite a long time. Ray, you probably see this quite often.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I get it. You've spent months and months training, and you come down to the last week or two, and, suddenly you're sick or you're fighting an injury, etc. And it's extremely difficult to make that decision not to run. I had to do it last year, the day before, which is incredibly difficult to do. But it's not worth risking your life over. Comrades is not going anywhere. It's always going to be there. It's unfortunately, Comrades comes at the worst possible time in the year. Everyone around you is sick and coughing and spluttering, and your immune system is low. You've come off a big training base, and unfortunately, you're just at extremely high risk. I know for me, every year is a struggle with the illness, but it's really just not worth the risk.
And something to mention is that Comrades is not an expensive race for probably most people. I deal with guys who enter Ironman, where the entry for a race like that can be anywhere around 4,500 to 5,000 rand plus airfare plus accommodation, and then they've spent about 14 or 15,000 rand, and then they're actually thinking, all right, now what do I do? They even battle harder from an emotional level to pull out, because it's a huge expense, and they don't give you refunds for pulling out of an iron distance race. But Comrades, it's going to be there every single year. If you miss 1 year, go for the next year. It's just as simple as that. Shaun, I just want to bring you on. I see you've got your... Sorry, Shaun. Are you there?
Yeah, no problem. I agree with everything you guys have said up to now in terms of the risk and dangers of taking, especially painkillers. I think painkillers or anti-inflammatories are a big problem with most Comrades runners, and I think we've all run with a couple of tablets in our pocket at some stage, and often it's not so much going in with the problem as you're expecting a problem along the way, and so it's there in a lot of cases just as a backup. And now I'm talking about 1 or 2 tablets, but I've heard and read about cases where guys get into serious problems in that, and that's where they carry a whole blister pack of these products along with them, and then they take 1, they take 2, and I've heard horror stories about people taking 6 and 10 and 12 of these tablets, and that's where I think the problems come in, where guys collapse and then up in serious problems in the medical team.
Yeah, look at and everybody will be impacted differently. I mean, you know, some guy might only take 1 or 2 tablets and it might cause, you know, kidney issues immediately just based on that small amount, where somebody else might tolerate more. But I just say there should be zero tolerance for anti-inflams during a sporting event or during training. I mean, you should have trained hard enough, I guess, to be able to do an event like Comrades.
No, definitely. Hopefully there's enough people out there listening and they pass it on to their friends.
Prodigal, I mean, you guys just take the pain from beginning to end, eh? No thoughts of painkillers.
Yeah, you don't take painkillers. When you're training, you enjoy the pain, yeah?
Yeah,
It's about that.
Yeah, Prodigal's actually, he's in the Drakensberg at the moment doing some altitude, some mountain training for Comrades, which is quite awesome. And in actual fact, this last week, I mean, I was actually looking, you run for Max Elite still, Prodigal? And
Yes, I'm still.
you know, this last week, I mean, I just saw the Max Elite runners, including last year's winner Bongamoose and Tambu, were actually running Comrades route up Polly Shorts. They did a 55-kilometer run, and they were running at a very comfortable 4 minutes a kilometer, which for them actually is very comfortable. Prodigal?
Yes.
What kind of training are you guys doing at the moment now to sort of get yourself into shape? I mean, is this week your big mileage week, your longest run?
Yeah. Obviously, April is our peak month.
And yes.
Yes, we're still on high mileage until next week. Then 3 weeks to the race, we'll start to taper.
Okay, and you guys are. I mean, when will your longest run be for Comrades?
I did a 70-kilometer last week. That was the longest one.
Okay.
I normally do it 6 weeks. Yeah, 6 weeks before the event.
And what kind of pace do you run there? That run?
I was running 4:30 per k.
Okay, so nice, comfortable pace.
Yeah.
Okay, it's very interesting. And now do you start to focus on some speed and some sharpening?
Yeah. I'm doing like 30 k's, running them my Comrades pace. Maybe doing like 30-40 per k on all those 30 kilometers and doing some track sessions as well.
Okay, thanks, Prodigal. I'm gonna. Raymond's actually. I mean, he's also a running coach, and so it'd be good to ask him. I mean, generally, Ray. I mean, Prodigal's obviously an elite, but I mean, maybe from your experience, you can actually just tell the runners like where they should be at this stage and what they should be looking at in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, at this stage, I have a feeling that most will probably be begging for the taper to start and to start cutting back. But it is a little bit early to start cutting back. And a lot of the people who are, you know, kind of begging for it are guys who have just started their build-up way too early. You know, sort of started marathons early on in January and just kept it going from there. And at this point now, the body's quite tired. But for those who did start their build-up around beginning of March, yeah, there's been you know, there's been significant build-up to this point, and they will be feeling some fatigue. But it's really another 2 weeks to go before before taper starts, taper proper. The thing with your taper is generally that it's not a, you know, taper is not a I actually hate the word taper because it kind of sounds like a holiday, and it's really not. So taper is a, you know, it's really just a reduction in your volume, but an increase in your intensity. So you really want to just get the, you know, you've been running long, slow distances now for a number of weeks, and you really want to just get some sharpness into the legs. The important thing is not to change too much in terms of what you've been doing there. So you've created a muscle tension in those muscles over the weeks of training. You don't now want to go and start doing things you haven't been doing and completely change that that muscle tension and the energy system use. So you want to reduce the volumes and you want to bring back some faster quality work, but not excessive amounts. so that you ultimately get to race day feeling light and fast and well rested. And that rested, well rested feeling doesn't come from just doing nothing. Doing nothing gives you a very lethargic, heavy feeling. That rested feeling comes from the drop in volume and the quicker sessions in between. And then when you get to Comrades, you're really feeling sharp and ready to fire. Can you hear me?
Oh, sorry, Ray. Sorry, guys, I was muted. I just wanted to ask Raymond quickly, somebody, Wandasili actually has asked a question, which he ran a 3:58 to Oceans. He wants to do a sub-7 hour Comrades. He's planning on running the slow mag 50, and he wants to do the Wally Hayward at about 4:38 minutes a K. He's asking, would it be doing too much with slow mag and Wally Hayward? What would you think?
Look, I'm assuming the 50 at slow mag and the 42 at Wally Hayward.
Yeah.
Look, it depends what you did the week before that. Now, the week before that was RAC, long run, 60K, etc. There was the one in Klerksdorp, so there were a couple of long runs there. So it depends what you did there. If you did, if there was a long run there, then I think it's probably bordering on a bit too much. Ideally, Wally is actually on the wrong weekend. Ideally, Wally should be one week later, and it would fit in perfectly. So the race schedule this year has been a bit difficult in terms of the long runs. But for he's at quite a high level. He's quite a strong runner. His body is going to recover fairly well. I think, assuming that the previous weekend was not an excessively long weekend, that running slow mag and then Wally would actually be fine. And as long as they're at Comrades race place and not being raced, then you should be fine. Then you've got one more week, the following one, where you would run around a 35K or so, and then you would begin your drop in volume.
Okay, thanks, Ray. Shaun, I just wanted to ask you as well. When do you do your longest run, and how do you start to taper for Comrades?
Yeah, just going back to the previous guy, I'd rather err on the cautious side and go 440, 445 okay, regardless of what his and Comrades time. I'd rather be a little bit more on the safe side. Go a lot slower in the can go past the first stage. I think if you ran silver at Ocean, that's quite a silver round. So yeah, like I said, it depends what you've done the week since then, especially last weekend. But yeah, I'd rather go, add another 10 seconds per K onto that training pace. For myself, this weekend I'll be doing the club run from Thursday up to Maritzburg, and it's also probably going to be about 445, even 450 a K. It will be a relatively easy run for me. It's more about just time on the legs, and then the week after that probably 40, 30, 20, and start easing into a taper. The runs during the week will be a little bit more emphasis on that sharpening up phase that you mentioned earlier. But extreme caution now, this is the time frame where you don't want to be mixing with people with flu in there, but you don't have control over those factors. The thing that you do have is what you do when you lace up the shoes and don't train. just be cautious on that front.
All right, so, I mean, we don't have any more questions, so I'm just going to close from our side, and I've just left you guys unmuted there as well. So I just want to say, first of all, a big thank you to Shaun and Raymond for joining, and Prodigal, thank you very much as well. It was great to have you guys on the panel. Thank you, everybody, for attending. If you guys have got any questions at all, you've got the ability to contact any of us. I've actually put all the Twitter handles on the slides. I am going to upload this recording tomorrow. I'll upload it to YouTube. I will post the link on social media for anybody that wants to push it around. And so just a big thank you. Thanks, Shaun and Ray and Prodigal. It was great to have you guys on. If there's anything you guys want to state before we shut the recording down.
My pleasure. Anytime. Good luck to everyone, and yeah, it's been great chatting again.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Prodigal. I'll see you soon. I'll be feeding you.
Yeah.
Okay, and Ray, thanks a lot, and really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us, and yeah, no, thank you. Thanks for the invite, and yeah, to everyone out there, good luck, and just keep it sane in these last couple of weeks. I know these last few weeks going into a big race are mentally challenging and extremely tough. So wrap yourself in bubble wrap and stay away from everyone coughing and sneezing, and give it horns on the day.
Thanks very much, guys. I'm going to close off now, and tomorrow we'll notify you guys once it's posted up. Thanks very much, and have a good evening.
Great, cheers.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.